Along to discuss all of this, and it was a very hectic news day, Chief Congressional Correspondent for CBS News, Nancy Cordes, and CBS News Justice reporter Paula Reid. CBS News Political Director Steve Chaggaris is also in the Washington Bureau. He's upstairs. And in New York, we have CBS News Justice and Homeland Security Correspondent Jeff Pegues. So, Jeff and Steve, hold on a second. We're going to deal with the table here first. Nancy, how would you describe the atmosphere on Capitol Hill today? You and I have been up there a lot. We've got probably between us 20 or 30 years of experience on the Hill. It had to feel like a kind of different sort of day.
It did. You know, we're very used to hyperbole on Capitol Hill and manufactured outrage. There was a lot of outrage today, and it didn't feel manufactured. There was
and some surprise, it seems to me.
Incredible surprise. One Democratic senator I interviewed was actually shaking when he was talking to me because he was so stunned by what had just happened. And so when you hear Democrats saying this is a constitutional crisis.
Do you think they mean that, or do you think that edges into the realm of hyperbole?
I think that they have been waiting to say something like that, and they think that this is the moment. This really crossed the Rubicon for them. They see a pattern now of President Trump firing or letting go officials within the Department of Justice who disagree with him, who thwart him, who try to block him, who embarrass him. And their question is, where does it end? And Senate Republicans very soon are going to be put potentially in a very difficult position. President Trump is going to nominate someone. If this is a person who is not seen as independent, as someone who's willing to continue an investigation that started under James Comey, Senate Republicans will have to decide whether to confirm that person or not. They gave the president a lot of leeway when it came to his cabinet. There were several cabinet picks they didn't really like, but they said, you know what, this is really his prerogative to name who he wants. The FBI director is not a member of the cabinet. The FBI director is supposed to be independent. And there are a lot of Senate Republicans who are not going to want to have to go out on a limb for Donald Trump if they feel that it's going to reflect badly on them in the future.
Paul, let's talk about this from an institutional point of view. Remind our viewers, what is the term for an FBI director? And that's just kind of a basic civics lesson, but also all that came around Director Comey last year during the heat of the campaign, and that what he did publicly and his explanations of that did not land necessarily uniformly well within the Bureau, within the department, or within the larger political atmosphere in which he found himself forced to operate in, correct?
That's right. So the FBI director serves for a term of 10 years. The purpose of that is to provide some continuity across different administrations, across different political parties. He or she serves at the pleasure of the president, who can fire the FBI director without cause. What's so interesting here, though, and the evidence that they've supported for this decision is that these are all facts that have been on the public record for months. The Deputy Attorney General laid out a lot of decisions that Comey made during the Hillary Clinton email investigation. Some of these decisions, specifically Comey's decision to send those letters to Congress in October, the president praised Comey at that time. But suddenly today, his first major act in office, the Deputy Attorney General is using all of these public events as proof or reason to support a decision to fire the FBI director. This does not amount to cause. Again, not that you need it, but the last FBI director who was fired because he misused department funds. And the president in that case waited till an independent body issued a report. And we know they're going to get a report on this in about 6 months. An independent Department of Justice watchdog is going to issue a report on all of this. And people I talked to inside the Department of Justice thought that would be when the president may look to fire the FBI director, because he would have an independent body giving him that evidence. So it's a very interesting that suddenly today these actions are enough to fire him.
Jeff, up in New York, does this in any way strike you as timing that ought to or does give those who look at either the Justice Department or the FBI cause for concern? Certainly some Democrats have pointed to the timing, but do you think there's anything in the pattern either of testimony or the pace or direction of the FBI investigation into the Russian question that raises concerns about the timing of this?
Well, I think there is. If you look at each and every one of these sessions where there has been testimony, either from the FBI director or former FBI Director Comey or former acting Attorney General Sally Yates. These have been riveting sessions in which we've heard new information each and every time about this expanding counterintelligence investigation. And so that is in part why the timing of all of this is so interesting. In fact, around the time of the inauguration, if the president and the White House was to raise an issue about Director Comey and his conduct during the 2016 campaign, well, perhaps that was the time to make this type of move. But now we are midstream in this counterintelligence investigation, and that's why you have people talking about the timing. But there is another point here, Major. On several occasions over the last month and a half or so, Director Comey has defied the president. Remember, in early March, there were the wiretapping claims. President Trump, of course, tweeted that President Obama wiretapped him in Trump Tower. And of course, we reported that Director Comey was angered by that suggestion, saying to aides that it suggested that the FBI had done something improper. So there have been several occasions over the last several weeks where the FBI Director Comey has defied and contradicted some of the claims that the president has made.
So, Steve, as a purely political matter, and this is a law enforcement matter, it's a legal matter, it's a matter that, as Paula pointed out, the president has the authority to do, but as a political matter, on the seismograph, if you will, indulge me that metaphor, where does this fall? Is this a massive earthquake? Do you think this will resonate through Washington and the political conversation for a good long while?
There's no question. And Major, I think you know better than anybody, having covered Trump longer than anybody at this organization, at least. This is another example of Trump not really sort of following through on a big bombshell type of event. So, okay, you're going to go ahead and you're going to sack the FBI director, yet there's no backfilling from anybody in the White House. There's no explanation for what the next steps are. You're allowing people like Democrats to fill in the blanks for you politically, and now the storyline moving forward is, oh, you did this because of the Russia investigation. Now, if they had actually had all their ducks in a row before they did this, they could have come out with some sort of thoughtful way of rolling this this move out. But it's a classic sort of Trump drop the bomb and then sort of step back and let everybody else fill in the blanks. And politically, it doesn't seem like it's a really smart move on his part. On the other hand, it's interesting to sort of the juicy part of this is watching Republicans and Democrats and Trump sort of and the way they've sort of handled Comey in general. I mean, Paula referenced that Donald Trump was cheerleading Jim Comey after at the end of October when he reopened the investigation into the Clinton emails. And at that time, Democrats were saying, that guy needs to go, right? Now, all of a sudden, Democrats are saying, well, wait a minute now, this is all about Russia. We don't want to look at the Clinton email part of this. And so there's a lot of politics being played here, but I think Trump has handed his opponents a lot of they're gonna hammer President Trump over this for a long time moving forward. And I think in terms of the seismograph, as you mentioned, I think this is going to resonate for a long time.
And Paula, there's an interesting sequence of events yesterday when Sally Yates, the acting Attorney General fired by President Trump, testified along with James Clapper, the former Director of National Intelligence. And Director Clapper was asked, do you know of any information that would confirm collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians? He said, no. As a matter of fact, I said that several months ago. Then he was asked, are you aware of the FBI counterintelligence investigation into that very question? No. Well, do you have any comment on what that might mean? No. And then former acting Attorney General Yates says, well, I can't answer any questions about that because I might divulge classified information. The next day, Comey is fired. So there will be those who will look at that sequence of events, Clapper being the one that the president often cites, saying there's no collusion, case closed, acknowledging the case isn't closed, and the one agency that's keeping that case open is the FBI. He says that in public. The former acting attorney general says it in public, and the next day, the person overseeing that investigation is fired. People will look at that and put those two things together, will they not?
Absolutely, and you see in the president's letter to the head of the FBI, he thanks him for telling him 3 times that he was not under investigation. But the fact is that it's the Trump campaign and anyone related to it that is under investigation. Just like with Hillary Clinton's server, it was not Secretary Clinton who was under investigation, it was her server and anyone who used it. So it does seem that the White House is trying to play this semantic game to make them look less guilty or less associated with Russia. But the fact is,
or less implicated.
Exactly. The fact is that the investigation is ongoing. You never know where it will lead or whether there may potentially be eventually evidence of collusion.
Nancy, it caught my ear when Richard Burr said today this complicates our work. And
Right.
he's discouraged and disheartened by the timing and the justification for this firing. Now, a lot of Republicans are sort of looking the other way, talking about the confirmation process, looking forward to the nominee, and kind of hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. But Richard Burr, who has not been necessarily a critic of this president, not necessarily a huge ally, tried to walk a fine line, is now saying on behalf of the committee that he is running and the investigation it's carrying out, this makes our life tougher.
And interestingly, he said that what disappoints him so much about the loss of James Comey as the FBI director is that he was more forthcoming with the committee than any other FBI director that Burr has interacted with. And so he may have liked that very much. It's possible the White House did not like how forthcoming James Comey was with this committee. It is a real shot across the bow, the fact that Chairman Burr went and made that statement. That was very striking. There are a few high-profile Republicans who have now come out against this this decision, or at least registering their concerns.
Bob Corker
you've got
of
Bob
Tennessee,
Corker, you've
Chairman
got
of the Foreign
John McCain.
Relations Committee.
Justin Amash in the House said that President Trump's letter was point-blank bizarre. The fact that he mentioned in the firing letter, thank you for telling me 3 times that I am not under investigation, and that he wants to introduce a resolution for an independent commission as early as tomorrow. So there are Republicans with whom this doesn't sit well. There are others who say, you know, look, this was probably coming sooner or later. Jim Comey was just too wrapped up in all of the politics of the last 6 months. He wasn't going to be able to perform this role effectively. It's time for a fresh start. But there is definitely a schism here within the Republican Party about whether this was the right thing to do.
And Jeff, I know you've been watching this very closely for the entire Trump presidency. And there was an aspect of the relationship or lack of relationship between President Trump and James Comey that everyone was looking for every single sign and trying to interpret or gauge what was going on. When Director Comey was at the White House and the president called him up and shook his hand, that was interpreted one way. And then on April 11th, when Maria Bartiromo of Fox Business News said, is it time or is it too late to push or to ask James Comey to step down? And President Trump said, no, I have confidence in him, but we'll see what happens. Could be interesting. All these things have been sifted for weeks and months. In that sifting process, Jeff, as you've talked to people around this investigation, was there an anxiety about Comey's length of time in this office? Were there people worried he might get fired and the implications of that? Or was there an assumption that Comey, through it all, was safer than not?
Well, once he got through January, I think most of the people that I consulted with on this felt that he was safe, and they were moving forward down at FBI headquarters. Senior officials were telling me that they were so confident about his position within the FBI at that point that they were really focused on the long term and what the American public was going to think about the conclusions in this counterintelligence investigation. They were concerned about that. So they were looking long term, not short term. And although they acknowledged that the director at that time, Comey, was in the process of rebuilding his image, if you will, after the 2016 election. And so there was no focus on the short term and whether he would be in that position. They were looking ahead to the long term, Major.
And Jeff, in the letters produced by the White House today, there is this assertion by Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, that lots of people from both sides of the political spectrum thought Comey got it wrong in 2016, and that Comey's failure to acknowledge that he'd made mistakes compounded those errors and made it impossible for him to continue credibly as a leader of the Bureau. Was that your sense within the Bureau itself, that not only he got things wrong, but was compounding that error by not admitting mistakes?
Well, yeah, there were career FBI agents, former senior FBI officials who felt that last year with the Clinton private email server investigation, he had departed from protocol. So there were people who were critical of his actions. And Comey knew that, but also, there are a lot of people in Washington and, frankly, here in New York who know that James Comey has an independent streak. And that was a selling point for some people in Washington because they felt that, in a lot of ways, he was beyond reproach. In fact, that he, because he had worked for both Democrat and Republican administrations, he was someone who was the right person for that job at this time. Consider there was this counterintelligence investigation, and he certainly felt that he was the right person during this moment in history. And you saw that independent streak, frankly, at play when he defied the president on wiretapping. That was a very public event where he was, through senior FBI officials, asking the Department of Justice to dispute the president's wiretapping claims. They didn't step in to help him out. And so he had to do that in that March 20th hearing on Capitol Hill, where he came out for the first time and announced that there was a counterintelligence investigation into whether Trump campaign associates were coordinating with the Russians. So at very public moments, he defied President Trump.
And Steve, you referred to this earlier in your answer, but it seems to me what you were driving at is when the president says, as he has repeatedly, the story is phony, it's a ruse, it's all generated by fake news, that perhaps strategically it would have been better for him to wait for something to either materialize or not materialize. But by firing Comey, he's created for himself an impression that it might not be fake after all, that there might be something there that he's nervous about.
There's no question. And what's also very curious, and everybody keeps pointing to the second paragraph in the letter that Trump wrote to Comey, where he references, I appreciate you informing me on 3 separate occasions I'm not under investigation. Now, if you look at the actual reasoning for Comey's dismissal, it had nothing to do with the Russia investigation. It had to do with his handling of the Clinton email investigation. So the fact that the president himself has raised the idea of the Russia investigation in his letter to Comey has a lot of people asking the question, what the heck is going on here? What is the reason, the real reason for you sacking the FBI director? And if it has to do with the Russia investigation, it raises all these questions. Again, handing ammunition to the Democrats to say, 1, this is Nixonian, as they like to say. 2, this is a constitutional crisis. And 3, calling for a special prosecutor or an independent investigator to take this out of the hands of the FBI. Because basically, what Democrats are saying now is the president has ruined this investigation in terms of the FBI.
And you also suggested this earlier, Steve, that the president would have been better equipped to have someone to nominate right at this moment, to get rid of Comey if that was his decision, which it clearly was, and it's his authority, which it clearly is, but then follow that up with a nominee and say, here's who I'm going to replace it with. And this person's been vetted by my team, and this person does or does not qualify on the status of credibility, but that's my next move. And it seems to me one of the things you're suggesting is by not having a next move, he has created this vacuum into which much speculation and criticism can thrive.
Which is a very consistent move for Trump, whether it's during the campaign or as president. He tends to drop these bombs and then not have the next steps ready to go. And so the question here is this. Traditionally, I think what any president would have done in this situation is have the next steps ready to go. Like you mentioned, the replacement is going to be this person, and here's why we did what we did, and here's why we're choosing this person as a replacement. None of that happened. All that came out was Comey is being sacked. There's nobody from the White House really explaining the president's side of the story. You got a couple of lower-level folks out there on cable trying to explain it, but they're not really giving it any heft no one has any understanding of what is going on in the president's head at this point. So you're letting your opponents fill in the blanks by saying it's about the Russia investigation and it's very Nixonian. So again, you can get out ahead of this stuff by writing your own script. And what Trump does repeatedly is he lets his opponents write the script for him, and then he has to play cleanup for weeks on end.
Jeff, before we let you go, Marco Rubio told us that, coincidence or not, the FBI goes on and will continue to function. Do you believe that's a credible reaction to this story? Do you believe the FBI internally and those closest to this investigation will feel a chilling breeze about that work coming from the top of this government? Or do you think they will say, doesn't matter what happens to James Comey, we have a job to do, we're going to do it, and we're going to chase these facts wherever they lead?
Well, I think they're professionals, so yes, it will move forward and this investigation will continue. But the bigger question is, what about how the public views this investigation? That's what has now been once again called into question, and that is something that I know FBI officials have been concerned about in the weeks leading up to this moment. And so this is another event that may shake confidence in how this investigation is carried out.
Paula or Nancy, do either of you want to take on the history lesson of Nixonian and the Saturday Night Massacre?
Well, I will tell you that the
because it's an important thing. It's being tossed around now, and if we can, I'd like our audience to get a sense or be reacquainted with that moment in history, if possible.
Sure. So the Nixon Presidential Library has actually tweeted this evening to say that Nixon never fired his FBI director, and hence this is not Nixonian. As you know, this is a term that's being tossed around by a lot of Democrats tonight. But Nixon did do something similar, and I think you'd probably be best equipped to walk us through the details, Major. So go ahead.
Oh, don't put me on the spot, Nancy. That's my job tonight. Paula, do you want to take it on?
I'm going to defer to you.
All right. So you can put it in your Google machine, folks. Saturday Night Massacre, the special prosecutor assigned to Watergate was fired by Nixon. Then the next person to step up was also fired. Then the next person in line of the Justice Department took the job. His name was Robert Bork. He later became a subject of an important Supreme Court confirmation hearing that went against President Reagan. But the Saturday Night Massacre was the time when this idea of a constitutional crisis set in motion by the president was done to thwart an investigation about that very White House. It was all wrapped up in Watergate, and that is where the terminology comes from. And as I'm glad you pointed out, the Nixon Library has helpfully reminded us it never got that high, but maybe just because the FBI director there was perhaps, well, I don't want to say cooperative, but less than investigatorily rigorous during the Nixon years.
Well, I will tell you that Congressman John Conyers, Democrat of Michigan, very senior Democrat, has just put out a statement.
And who was on the impeachment, it was on the House Judiciary Committee at the time, I believe. It's possible he was. On the Rodino Committee.
That sounds right to me.
I think he was.
He is calling this a Tuesday night massacre.
Tuesday Night Massacre, okay.
Even though it's, one person has gone down, but it was inevitable that a Democrat was going to coin that phrase before too long.
Right, because it's Tuesday, not Saturday, so we'll deal with that. Nancy Cordes, Paula Reid, Steve Chaggaris, Jeff Pegues is already gone. He was in New York. We appreciate their time. And, Jeff's still there?
Thank you for the history lesson.
Well, Jeff, they told me you had to go. I'm so glad you're there. You steady us all, and we thank you.
Thanks, Major.
We'll be back more with this story and lots of other news after the break.